Hi, friend. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Tasshin. Excited to see you.
Yeah. I'm really excited to have this conversation to learn more about your experience of self-love and how you help people to access that and dive into that. And yeah, I'd love to just start by hearing about your life story. For me, any kind of conversation about specific topics really benefits from knowing more about who the person is and where they're coming from and what their life has been like. And I feel like to me, every person is just this incredible, unique person. And, there's only one Anita like you. And it's like, oh, wow, I want to know what it's like to be Anita and what you've been through and what's happened in your life. And yeah, I feel like learning more about who someone is and what they've been through in their life is just such a privilege and also tends to characterize the specific things that they're interested in and how they approach it. And so I find that there's often unexpected connections between the events that have happened in someone's life and how they approach different challenges and experiences that they've had and the things that I'm interested in hearing about from them. So yeah, I would just love to hear anything you'd like to share about your life and what you've been through and things that have happened to you and kind of how you conceive of your life story. Anything that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it.
Cool. That's such a beautiful framing, by the way. Um, yeah, I guess I'll start off with where I come from. So I was born in Iran, and I spent the first 10 years there. And then when I was 10, my family and I moved to London. And yeah, it was funny, like moving to London, not speaking any English and going into like school after like a couple months of being in London. Yeah, it was just a really odd experience because the culture clash was so strong. Like it wasn't just a language barrier, it was also just a culture clash. Like it felt like um almost like everything that I thought was good was bad and everything I thought was bad was good. It's like everything was just like the other way around. Took me probably like around 2 years to really feel like I was a Londoner or like I somewhat fitted in. And um, and yeah, school was interesting. And let's see, I think the main two hobbies I had in my teens were making music. That was like super fun for me. The way that came about was like from a really young age, I used to write poetry, like probably a couple years into learning how to write. And yeah, by the time I was like maybe like early mid-teens, I remember one day I had this like poem slash lyrics thing that I'd written, and I was like asking my brother because he's really good at um just finding stuff on the internet, especially back then when like Google wasn't as big. And I was like, I want to be able to like put music on top of my lyrics and poems and stuff. And I was like, how do I do that? And then he like found me a training thing, like a summer camp type thing for making music. And I went, it was really short. It was like maybe a week or so. Um, but it felt like love at first sight. Like it was like what I was looking for. Um, and so I spent the next few years just doing that as my hobby, just making music in my room. And I would just forget about like there were days where I would start in the morning and the sun would go down and I wouldn't realize because I was just so like in flow and just engrossed in the experience. And then the other hobby that I used to also um, be interested in was just watching a lot of documentaries and videos on YouTube about just like stuff that kids are into, I guess, like bigger things like the space and or space physics, the like the Mayans, Egypt, all these like mysteries around the world and outside of Earth. And yeah, those two things were kind of the two things that kept me sane through my teens, I would say. And then yeah, what happened after that? I went to uni, and then 6 months into it, I realized that the degree I'd chosen wasn't really for me, but I had these amazing friends, so I was like, I'll just stay and hang out with them. And so I finished my degree and I tried to work in that field, but I did that for a couple of years and it just didn't feel like it was going anywhere. So eventually I started learning to code, just kind of playing around on the internet. And then I found this free coding bootcamp in London. And it's so funny because like it was one day where I was in my room and I was trying to learn JavaScript and I was procrastinating. And that procrastination led to like finding this coding bootcamp. And it was the deadline was just like a few days away. And I was like, God, okay, now I have to like make a video and apply for this. And um yeah, really consider whether I want to make this change. And then the start day was going to be like 3 weeks later. So it was like, you know, in London, what do you call it? The notice period is 1 month. So when you want to leave a job, you have to give 4 weeks notice. But I had 3 weeks. I had to start in 3 weeks. So I had to convince my manager to use my annual leave as part of my notice period. And yeah, I just like quickly, kind of overnight, decided to make the change. Did the coding boot camp. It was one of the best experiences of my life. It was just so enriching, so exciting. It was like it's really difficult as well. It was like you had to face your demons. I think that was like one of the first times in my adulthood where I had to start facing my demons because it was just this constant extreme of euphoria because you got something to work and just despair for things breaking and not being able to solve a bug. And that just going from those two extremes maybe was one of the starting points for me becoming interested in inner work and understanding myself. Um, yeah, what else? Yeah, did coding for a few years, like 6 or 7 years. Did that for as a career, and that was also really enriching and enjoyable and amazing. But equally, it also brought up a lot of demons for me. It was quite emotionally draining at times. And again, it pushed me more into inner work because I was like, I need to figure out. I think like pain is one of the best motivators sometimes. And so yeah, that pain pushed me to figure out what was going on. Why was I getting triggered? Why was I feeling things like feeling inferior or feeling like um almost like taking the errors personally as a reflection, like it was a reflection of me as a whole, like my personality and everything that I am. Um, and also what was really confusing for me was that um, I couldn't see that happening as much in my peers or in my colleagues. And and I think part of it is like hidden, like nobody wants to really acknowledge that or really like admit that they're really suffering. And part of it is that I think everybody's made differently. So some people just yeah, they don't, everyone's triggers are different. So for some people, those things are triggering, for others, it's not. And I think also the way what I've seen in myself and other different people is that sometimes your triggers can show up at work and sometimes your triggers can show up in relationships, and it's obviously both, but the pattern I've seen is that um a lot of people tend to get triggered more in one area than the other. So like work for me and maybe relationship for some other people. And all of that was just so fascinating for me. So that became the object of my my interest and fascination. And um, yeah, and then eventually the like pandemic happened, and a lot happened, and the kind of the culmination of all those years of me getting triggered by work, plus like the pandemic, being isolated, overworking, all of these things came together and led to me having a very difficult burnout period, which went on for a year or so, or even more. Um, and yeah, with that period, I knew I was burning out, and I'd seen other people, and I'd seen the consequences. But I think somehow I felt immobilized. I all I could do was just like continue going straight. I couldn't turn, I couldn't step away. And I knew that was happening, but I didn't know how to like, it's almost like, how do you unpanic? How do you come out of a panicked state? It's difficult when you're in the midst of it and when it's happening. I think um at least some forms of burnout can be thought of as a chronic process of triggering, getting triggered over and over and over again. And the stress that the thing that triggers is not is constant. So this not being removed from the equation. And so yeah, you continue to get exposed to it and react the same way. And so, and when that happens for a long time and it becomes like a chronic thing, yeah, and then yeah, especially if there's like um an absence of meaning associated with that stressor. In this case, like work was losing its meaning for me. So yeah, that all culminated in me getting really burnt out. And I decided to just take a break. So I went on a sabbatical, and yeah, and then it was like that sabbatical was again the kind of like the coding bootcamp. It was quite extreme. It's that like, moments of euphoria and just, big shifts happening and me feeling liberated from old patterns, and then getting pulled down, getting pulled down into the despair and confusion and feeling untethered and feeling a kind of disconnected from the rest of society because you're not doing the thing that society is telling you to do, which is get a reliable job. But yeah, like so many things happened in that sabbatical. And I feel like I entered as one person and came out of that as a completely different person. And in a way, the change was more like I just became more of me. I kind of was able to shed the extra weight that I was carrying. Um, let's see what else. Parallel to all of this, like especially the last 4 years, the inner work stuff that was happening related to work and all the triggers that I mentioned. At some point, I identified self-love as a target for myself, because I could see that it seemed at the time as like the highest leverage point for the changes that I wanted in myself. It seemed like if I just target that, the other stuff will just unravel on their own. And it did. And it was for the most part it was a correct hypothesis for the most part, I would say. Yeah, so that was also happening that, yeah, in parallel to all of that, like the burnout, the sabbatical, etc. And then, yeah, I kind of started learning a lot from that journey. And then at some point, a switch happened last year, like last summer, summer 2022, where I basically suddenly felt, okay, now I'm resourced. Like before, it was like, it's kind of, if you're really hungry and you're just kind of looking for things, maybe there isn't a meal accessible to you, but you're snacking, you're taking a bit there, you're taking that, and then at some point you reach a threshold where you're like, okay, I'm full now, or at least I'm like satisfied. I'm not hungry anymore. I'm not feeling under-resourced. And that shift was really beautiful for me because before that, um, there was this desire that I wanted to be of service, but it felt like it came from a feeling of obligation or should, or it's the right thing to do. And I wanted it to feel, because I knew deep down that there was a way that like there was a desire for it. So I knew there was a way that can come out cleanly. But at that time I didn't have access to it yet. But then when this switch happened, it was like, oh, okay, now this way of being of service feels right. It feels like it's coming from a genuine desire rather than I should do this or it's the right thing to do. Um, and when that switch took place, then I started thinking about coaching and kind of learning how to do that. Um, and that's what this year has been about, doing that work and going deeper and deeper into it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Hmm.
Uh,
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I loved hearing that and just the arcs of different themes in your life and how that led to your interest in inner work and how that's currently manifesting as helping other people. I loved hearing about all of that. Um, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about your childhood. I mean, it's to me, it's fascinating that you grew up in Iran, and that's a really different childhood than what I had. And I was really struck by what you said about how when you moved to London, it was like everything that you thought was good was now bad, and everything that you thought was bad was now good. And I wonder if you could say more about that, and also just what your childhood was like.
yeah. Mm, well, I'll start off with my childhood in Iran. Um, yeah, it was I had really good parents and lived in in a big city and basically lived very close to my cousins and my family on my dad's side. Um yeah, I was very into like cycling and doing like gymnastics and arts and crafts and a lot of solo kind of what's the word, activities. Um And yeah, I would kind of get lost, like any other child, I guess, lost in my imagination. Like I was a fussy eater, so I didn't eat a lot of things, but the things I did eat, I just loved so much, and I would pay attention to the flavors. So I remember like fantasizing about being on TV and discussing like different types of butters and like being like, oh, this one has like this taste in the back of your mouth. Like, and I hadn't, as far as I remember, I hadn't seen that like anywhere, but I just there were certain foods that I just loved, and yeah, I would just be deeply, feel deeply nourished, especially in hindsight. Like I felt deeply nourished by certain foods, while also just like completely rejecting some other foods, which I think was a pain for my mom, but yeah, yeah, I remember being alone a lot because my brother wasn't born until I was 7, I think, or 6.5, something. And my parents weren't sure if they were going to have another child, but I begged them for years. I was like, I need a sibling. I want a sibling. Because like all my cousins had siblings and I loved their connection and I wanted the same. And in a way, when my brother was born, like he was the first love of my life. Like I just I think because of the age gap, there's almost like a motherly love that I have for him. So it's often when I have emotional experiences like with psychedelics or other types of work where you go deep, his love is one of the first loves that come up, and it's so deep and it's so I can only imagine what it must be like to have a child, because I'd imagine like that's like a small version of that. Or yeah, so I was just like so excited when he came, and it was just like way more than it's like, you know, when you're a child and you like you want something, you want like a toy or something, um and you just like you build it up in your head and you think it's gonna like I guess adults do it too, right? Like, so you think it's just going to change your life, and then after like a few weeks, you're just over it. You know, it's just sitting on the floor. But with my brother, it's just a weird comparison. It was like, but it was like I just made it up to be this big thing, but it was just it exceeded my expectations by just and it just kept on giving, you know. And we went through different phases together. Of course, like when we came to London, I think in some ways we grew even closer because it was like, you know, the culture clash thing that I mentioned, it was that was happening outside. And in a way, my parents still represented that, you know, what was happening in Iran and the culture in Iran. So it was like my brother was kind of um, the middle point where he knew the culture in London, but he also knew the culture in Iran. So it was like, you know, the two of us together, it was like, okay, here is safe, you know, this is our kind of safe space because we get it, like we both get it, the other person gets it. Um, Especially because I didn't have Iranian friends at the time, because like where I went to school isn't in an Iranian neighborhood. So yeah. Um yeah, and it was just fun, the two of us like discovering the internet together, like my dad getting our first computer, and yeah, it was just a beautiful connection that we had. I used to pick him up from school and kind of chat to him after school, and yeah, the culture clash thing, I think it was a painful and difficult experience at times, because the first 2 years, yeah, I was kind of still adjusting, and I was getting bullied for being different and for not speaking English at first. And um, yeah, definitely during that time, I was definitely asking my parents if we could go back. Um, but then at the 2 year mark, something shifted where yeah, like I said before, I kind of just finally felt like, okay, this is my new life now, and it's fine. And then I since started to like London more and kind of start to feel like it was home. Whereas before I was really rejecting it because I could see I was associating all of my pain to London because I didn't have that before, you know, like, so it was like obvious that that was the reason. But now it's funny now, like I think of that move as being one of the most kind of the luckiest event that took place in my life, because yeah, I just have like way more opportunities now than I would have, I think. Um, yeah.
What led your parents to move?
I think it was a mix of things. I think one is like, it's really common for people to leave Iran. The other thing is that so my mom kind of anticipated that my brother and I might leave by the time we're 18, or like once we're 18 or after that, because that is the trend that does happen, and you know many people in my family have done the same. So my mom kind of had this theory that, oh, like if that's a likelihood, uh if there is a likelihood of that happening, if that is a potential outcome, why not kind of move as a family now, as opposed to like wait for the inevitable, you know, and then be separated at that point. And also my mom's brother was living here, and they're really close, so she wanted to be with her family because she's from a different city, so she was living with my in my dad's city and with like kind of close to his family. So she wanted to be with her family, and she wanted to, she had visited London the year before to visit my uncle, and she loved it. Like she was like she loved the place. She's very outgoing, and she's kind of the opposite of me, basically. Very extroverted, and likes um hustle and bustle and kind of busy streets and stuff. So she really liked it. And then she went back to, so she came with my brother. Me and my dad had stayed back while she was visiting for like a month or something. And yeah, she came back and she apparently told my dad, like, we're moving to London. And then my dad was like, no way, we're not moving to London. Why would we do that? Like, our family is here, our house is here, our job is here. Like, why? And then yeah, my mom was like, well, I'm going. I'm taking the kids with me if you want to come. Yeah, I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but yeah, that was kind of how it went. And yeah, they were willing to come back if it wasn't going to be fruitful for all of us. And that's why that period where I was like asking my parents if we could go back, I think they did consider it, but ultimately, yeah, I think they could tell that time will help. So,
Hmm. What were the things that used to be bad that were good after you moved?
mm, you mean things that were bad in Iran and like fine in London? Or like, okay, one that comes to mind is like, in Iran, I think it's like it's normal to show affection to your friends, to like express your love for them or something, and and then, but this does not go down in London. Like the school, especially the school I go to, you don't do that because it's, yeah. So I did that, and I got bullied for it.
Oh, oh
Yeah.
man. That's both amusing and sad. I'm like, oh, I'm sad about
I
that.
did go to a rough school as well, I have to add.
Uh-huh. Fair. Uh, and can you tell me more about the music that you created as a teenager? Like what instruments did you use, if any, and like what was the music that you created like?
Um, yeah, I never really stuck with any instruments. Because what I realized that what I liked it was the process of creation. Once I would create, I would get bored of, like, I wouldn't want to just practice the same thing over and over again. So I never managed to like stick with any instruments, which was sad, but it just meant that I was like, okay, fine, that's the case. I'm just gonna like go all in on so I was using Logic Pro, which is an Apple software for making, it's kind of like GarageBand. And then I was using a keyboard, like a MIDI keyboard, um to make the sounds, and I was making a mix of things. Like I was making like ambient, electronic, and hip hop, those three kind of. And it's a bit embarrassing, but I used to also rap. So that was like, you know how I said I was making lyrics and like writing poems and stuff. So I would write raps because I felt like you could express more, and I liked to listen to hip hop at the time. So yeah, I would basically, and I couldn't sing, so rapping is like a way to get around. It's a loophole if you
Hmm.
can't sing. Um yeah, so that was really fun.
I think by embarrassing you mean badass. I'm so glad I asked. I thought there'd be more there. So It's like, oh, that's cool.
I can't believe I said that like in a recorded setting because I can't take it back now.
Well, I'm glad that you shared. I think that's really cool, honestly. So, um, yeah, I'd love to hear about how to ask this question. You mentioned that you've noticed some people tend to have triggers in one area of life more than another, like romantic relationships or friendships or work, and that for you it was more work. And I wonder if you could just say a bit more about like maybe a specific situation that you remember getting really upset about at work, or like a kind of common theme that something would make you feel triggered. Like, what was that like for you?
Mm. Yeah, I think I had this expectation for things to take a given amount of time. So let's say if I had a bug or if I had a particularly challenging task, I yeah, I was like really hung up on like, oh, this is taking too long. I'm taking, I'm trying to solve this problem, but it's like it's been, a few hours and I'm just like I'm still here, or maybe it's the next day and I'm still here. And that would just like really trigger me because and it would just put me in this cycle where like, you're trying to use all of your mental RAM, like your mental capacity on a task. But then if like, I don't know, 30% of it is being taken by this trigger, then suddenly you have less capacity. But then that means that it takes longer because of that, right? And then that takes more. Then like 50% is taken towards the trigger, and then it's just like this vicious cycle that you get into, and then at some point it's like, oh no, I just need to like take a step back and then you reset and then you come back and then it starts building up again and again. So I used to get stuck in those cycles a lot. And then I think also that meant that whole cycle and that whole experience would then lead me to conclude that I wasn't good at what I was doing, which then made me lose interest in pursuing like continuing to improve my skills. So it was like kind of again another layer of another vicious cycle. And then there was also this pattern of like comparing myself to my colleagues and peers and stuff, which again was taking up a certain percentage of my mental capacity while I was trying to like get something that is quite mentally taxing in the first place done. Um, and ultimately, I think what I deeply really wanted was to do good work. And in my last job, I worked for this online pharmacy, and the people that I was building software for were people that worked in that company because I was making tools for the warehouse. And I loved like speaking to them and then like understanding the problem and then going back, solving the problem, then going back, delivering the results, and then them being really excited and be like, oh my God, this saved me so much time. Or like this kind of interaction was so meaningful for me. And so um that interaction would motivate me to continue like learning skills and upping my skills. So that was in some ways that was a positive feedback loop, but I would get caught up in the other negative feedback loop a lot more. Um, and um, and yeah, and then this cycle happening over and over again for many years. I mean, there was some obviously like some things did shift. It wasn't always like that bad, but I think in some ways, the more I wanted to do good work, the more this pressure would build up and become stronger. And yeah.
You mentioned that when you focused on self-love, you had this hypothesis that like self-love was the highest leverage thing you could work on, and that the things you really wanted would be downstream of that, and that hypothesis sort of paid off. And I wonder, what were the things that you wanted that were downstream of self-love that you did find sort of came from focusing on self-love?
Yeah, one of them was this comparison thing. Um, yeah, that was something because I could see that it was adding a lot of or causing a lot of suffering to my work day or just my general experience. And I knew that it wasn't fruitful. But when I had tried to like tackle it directly, it wasn't like I did make some progress on it, but it wasn't fundamentally shifted or changed. Um, the other one was self-doubt. So this whole pattern that I was describing is it kind of stems from self-doubt. Like you have this belief that um you're not the best or the fastest or the most efficient or the most whatever. And then you almost like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're thinking that so much that it kind of you freeze up. You just yeah, it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the self-doubt was something that I really wanted to work on and was working on as well. So those two are the ones that come to mind, for example.
Mm,
But there were others as well.
mm. You have this tweet that where you said, I made self-love a targeted goal for about 3 years, and it was the highest payoff project investment of my life. Rough process. Dissolve the negative inner voice, rewire my brain nervous system to feel safe, become embodied, and develop emotional fluidity. And that, if I'm not mistaken, that's overlapping with this pyramid that you've made
Mm.
about self-love. And I wonder if you could say more about, like, during that time period where self-love was your goal, like what did you do practically to work on self-love, and how did you, like, what practices did you do, and how did you work on that?
Mm. Yeah, there was a bunch of different things. I think the most kind of basic thing was journaling. So when I would get triggered and get stuck in those cycles that I described, um, I would be like, I would suddenly catch myself that I'm stuck in that cycle, and I would kind of be like, okay, let's just take a break and let's write down. And I would just kind of do a brain dump of all of my fears and concerns and all the stuff that was coming up. And that was kind of like the most basic starting point, and also a very foundational thing that I do go back to sometimes even now. And then it was other stuff like trying rain. Um, um, I've now forgotten that because I haven't used it for a while, but Tara Brach's Rain, because I read her book called Radical Self-Compassion. Um, and yeah, that was like also one of the tools that I used for recognizing the um the trigger that was coming up, and also like identifying it in the body, and then also nurturing myself to step out of that or to come out of that triggered state. That was also really effective. And then yeah, so it was just like a bunch of tools like this to begin with. And then I did in 2020, I did uh Joe Hudson's masterclass, the Art of Accomplishment masterclass. It was a very intense course. It was like 8 weeks long. Um, and I think we had to do like 10 hours a week or something while doing a full-time job. So it was quite intense, but um, that was really impactful for me. That was a lot about emotional fluidity and kind of yeah, transforming the negative inner voice and the inner critic. And that one of the most useful tools or helpful tools that came up for me with respect to working with the inner critic was doing anger work. So, releasing anger just by yourself in a room, or on a call with other participants. Yeah, it's funny because I didn't have like the first time I tried it, I didn't have I just did not have access to anger. I think usually until that point when I would get quote unquote angry, the way it would come out would just be like annoyance or maybe a bit of frustration. But it would always quickly go to sadness. So if I was truly angry, in hindsight, I was angry, but it would come out in tears if it was quite strong. I only know that in hindsight, but like at the time, I would just think it's sadness. But yeah, the first time I tried the anger work, it was like, oh, I'm trying, but it's like it was like I'm faking it, and it's still not coming out. And then prompted by my partner's comment, I basically made the frustration of not getting angry the object of my um of that exercise, and then that kind of did open the floodgates a little bit, but it was like a sneak peek, you know, it was but I could see, I was like, oh, okay, the door has opened and I can see the light through it. um and so I did loads of anger work sessions during those 2 months, and yeah, I did it really broke through. And somehow like my negative inner voice just got completely transformed in that process, like without even really targeting it directly. So that was like a very helpful tool. What else? Yeah, then by the time I was quite burnt out, I now know that the kind of quote unquote symptoms that I had at the time were associated with your nervous system being dysregulated. So I was like panicking over nothing or like very small things, and I would just have anxiety and just lots of little ways that my life was different to how it was before as a result of this. And so I'd done some like big breathwork journeys, like 2 hour ones that are um upregulating, so you know, using the mouth and stuff. So I was kind of familiar with breathwork, but yeah, I came across this app called Othership, and I just became hooked on it. Like I just got into a positive feedback loop with it where I would do it and then I would feel better. So then the next time I would feel like I was quite activated from the day, I would naturally think to do it. And it just kind of got deeper and deeper into this feedback loop, and it really helped. And I also have to mention that obviously then I went on a sabbatical, so the kind of the main stressor had been removed as well. Um, yeah, so that was another big tool. So that's like the inner critic, the nervous system, emotional fluidity stuff came mostly out of doing IFS, getting IFS therapy. And well, it was a combination, but that was a big one. And I think the biggest shift that took place, and this is one of like the best skills I've ever learned in my whole life, was like this was maybe after I don't know, a few months of IFS therapy, doing it on roughly once a week, like a weekly basis, plus the nervous system stuff that I'd been doing prior. Um, that led to me finally actually be able to feel my emotions in a way that I wasn't able to before. Obviously, I had tried with rain and other techniques. But one thing that I always struggled with was I would constantly get distracted. So I would sit down and be like, oh, I guess I should feel my feelings, because like that's a common piece of advice. And the one that, you know, the few times that I had been able to do it, I knew that it's helpful, but I couldn't do it regularly or consistently. But so yeah, I would sit there and then suddenly like 5 minutes would go by and I'd be like, oh my God, I just went to like I went down memory lane and completely got distracted without realizing. And then I'm like, okay, let's start again. And then I'll be like, why is my phone in my hand right now? Like, how did that happen? And then I would put my phone in the other side of the room and try again and again. So that was kind of what was happening before when I tried to feel my emotions. But yeah, after getting FS therapy and the nervous system stuff, I like to think of it as like I worked through a lot of the backlog, um, which meant that I could then sit down and feel the emotions that are coming up right now. And that just felt life-changing. Um, yeah, like it felt like getting a new, it was like I was walking and now I had a bike, or I had a bike and now I had a car, it was like a big, big shift. Um, yeah, so that was another tool. And then the last thing I would say was it was a lot of different things, I guess, overall, but these are like the things that I've identified as being like the most important kind of pieces of the puzzle. Um, yeah, the other one is like connection. So other people being mirrors, being able to like see yourself through someone and have them see themselves through you. That kind of loop can be really healing if there's a mutual seeing. So if the connection is like I'm here to see you rather than I'm here to get something from you, it can be deeply healing. And it's funny, I heard recently I had someone describe self-love as I'm trying to remember, I'm gonna paraphrase it, but there was something like I know I love myself when the people that used to annoy me no longer annoy me. And what she meant by that was that it's like the reason I'm annoyed by something in someone is because I'm not accepting that thing in myself, or either I want that thing in myself and I don't feel like I don't have it, or I don't want it to be there. Um, and yeah, so I think connection is also a massive tool.
Can you say more about the breathwork component and like what techniques in that app were really helpful for you and how you understand that?
Um, so the app kind of splits the different breathwork techniques into two categories. So upregulating and downregulating. So upregulating kind of takes the nervous system into fight or flight, as I understand it, and the downregulating ones take you into the parasympathetic or rest or digest. Um, and so those are the kind of the two overarching categories. And within that, I was mostly gravitated towards the downregulated ones. So I was doing very simple stuff like box breathing, 4-7-8. So it's like inhale for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. And a lot of with a lot of these types of breath work, the key thing is the exhale. And actually, if you put your hand on your heart as you inhale and count, or just kind of get a feel for how fast your heart is beating, and then you exhale and you put your hand on your heart, you'll notice that your heart beats slower on the exhale. So there's this kind of pattern where the inhale is slightly upregulating and the exhale is slightly downregulating. So as I understand it, by increasing the exhale, you get to go into the parasympathetic. So that's kind of the key thing. And you kind of do it, I think, especially once you've been doing it for a while, like I'll notice myself now when I'm in kind of fight or flight or something, like I'll be eating and I'll be eating like too fast. And then I'll just just stop for a second and I'll like take in a breath and then do a slow exhale. And then I'll go back to eating, and then it's like it's different. I can feel the shift. And that's another thing, that's an interesting thing as well about noticing you're in fight or flight. If I'm particularly like stressed out or feeling quite activated, I'll notice that I'll get hungry soon after eating. And it's funny because the parasympathetic is called rest or digest, or rest and digest. So it's kind of in the name that when you're in the parasympathetic, you get to digest the food, whereas when you're in fight or flight, digestion is not a priority. So that's why you get hungry like when you eat, because, or like right after, maybe an hour later, I get hungry instead of 3 or 4 hours. So yeah, like noticing throughout the day all the little moments where you might be activated, and then just turning the switch by just changing your breath, or even just, like relaxing your body. All of these things kind of help. Yeah.
Can you say more about the emotional fluidity portion and what practicing that looked like for you?
Sure, yeah. Um, so I guess there's a few different pieces. There's like the there's I guess I can break it down into two parts. There's like the part of getting through feelings that are already in the body from the past that didn't manage to be felt in the moment. Um, so that's kind of like working through the backlog piece. And then there's the other piece, which is being able to feel emotions in the moment. So with regards to the backlog piece, yeah, I found something like IFS and doing a practice where it feels quite somatic, so you can feel the emotions in your body, and then working through that and kind of unburdening the beliefs and stories that are attached to that. That is kind of one piece. And then there's like feeling emotions in the moment, which is, it's kind of the same skill, but it's sitting here right now and being like, oh, okay, I'm noticing maybe some anxiousness coming up, and then just riding that wave. And then it just, that's the thing as well. It's like it just shifts so quickly. It's kind of like clouds. If you pay attention to clouds, you will see that they don't stay constant. They just move and shift and morph, and um yeah, just change position and shape. And it's the same with emotions. It kind of just comes up like a wave and then shifts and dissipates, and sometimes it gets stronger, sometimes it just dies out. Yeah, so that's one piece of it. And then there's also this piece of it which is like this kind of dynamic way of responding to emotions. So like anger comes up, releasing, using the body to express the anger. Like maybe it's punching a pillow, maybe it's stomping your feet, maybe it's pushing a wall or pushing a piece of, a boulder if you're outside. Yeah, crying, just kind of allowing all the emotions. I think ultimately, yeah, it's accepting and allowing that emotions are okay and they're part of life, and they're not bad. And I think one of the most interesting discoveries I had was that what makes an emotion particularly uncomfortable or difficult is the resistance to the emotion. So I noticed that if I actually fully stayed with the emotion and just experienced the emotion in its raw kind of points or stimuli, or yeah, then it was completely fine. It would feel either neutral or even pleasurable. And it's funny because I noticed this with sadness at first, and I was like, okay, sadness is easy, like whatever. Like as in it's kind of sadness is one of those things that a lot of people can probably recall times where they felt some sadness, but there's some like beauty in it that you can kind of enjoy. So I think that's like one that is more easy to see that with. So that's what I mean by like easy. I'm not saying that sadness is easy by itself, but so anyway, I noticed that with sadness, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna actually try and see if this theory is correct. I'm gonna like play around with different things. And I did it with anxiety, for example. And I noticed, oh, anxiety, if I really pay attention, it's fear and excitement. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to separate them out and feel each of them on its own. And it's like, okay, like fear on its own is if I just feel the full totality of the fear, it's fine. Um, and yeah, I did it with, and then some emotions was a lot harder. Like despair was particularly difficult not to get lost in. Um, and another one that was difficult, surprisingly, was disgust. That was also like, there's this feeling of repulsion and a feeling of pushing away. Um, so being able to stay with the totality of that feeling is quite hard because you basically have to undo the pushing away. Um, but again, I could see with literally all of these emotions, and it's not necessarily easy to pull off every time. And I still get lost in them. And I still buy into the stories and I still buy into the underlying beliefs and all of that. But I know that when something in me is like ready to be like, okay, now let's just be with it, then it's possible to do that and feel neutral or even pleasure from that experience.
Can you say more about what your experience of the social connection portion was, like what that looked like for you?
Um, yeah, the time where this manifested the most and I could see it most vividly was when I was at Medley, which was this 10-week residency in Berlin in this space made by my friends Ananta, Chris, and Rick. And yeah, they created this really beautiful, magnificent space in Berlin and brought along I think 14 people or something like that. And we all got to basically hang out for 10 weeks. So it was kind of like a community living situation, but we didn't actually all live in the same space. I lived with two of the other residents. But we got to see most people every day or, at least a few times a week. And yeah, and I felt so nourished and so just resourced being in that community and yeah, getting into these kind of dynamics where you're just sitting with someone, you're really being with them and they're really being with you and it's like the thing that I thought in me was so bad, you're totally fine with. And the thing that I think is beautiful about you, you don't seem to think it's a good thing. And like being able to reflect that back is so healing and so moving sometimes because you get to see a counter, almost like counter evidence to your belief, especially if the belief is really deeply seated. And then especially when it's coming from someone who you really trust and feel like they have your back and they are telling you the truth, or they are, they have this nourishing or nurturing kind of presence to them, which a lot of people did in that space. So yeah, just being surrounded by that, I feel really privileged to have had that experience. Yeah, really moved me. Yeah, so that is like an important one. And I think that's maybe we can talk about like the pitfalls that can come up in self-love. Is like one of them is like being so self-reliant that you kind of forget the connection piece. And I say this because I'm also guilty of this myself. um if you're someone who really admires independence and self-reliance and all of that, yeah, it's easy to look at self-love and be like, okay, I will just kind of be my own everything, and forget the connection piece and forget that we need that social connection, that social, being emotionally known and being deeply seen like that, is something that I think we can give ourselves in the absence of, other people, but sometimes you also need to have the other, you know, the other piece of it, which is being in the presence of somebody who has that feeling towards you, and vice versa, being able to be that person for someone else as well.
How has your understanding of what self-love is changed over this time?
I think the biggest change is when I first started, I thought that self-love was something that I was going to like achieve, and also something that I saw it as a skill acquisition challenge or task. And in some ways it is like, this framework that we talked about, in a way, it is like learning those skills. But I think the biggest realization was that the work is not to get self-love from some outside thing. Like, let's say, if I'm reading about some topic, like I don't know that anything about it, and so I go out and I, I get to acquire, from the outside. But with self-love, I realized that love is already there. It's inside. I know it sounds so like cliche and so like, I don't know. I don't know. I could sound unhelpful sometimes, I can imagine. But I really experienced this for myself firsthand. And yeah, I saw that there was something inside me um, that loved me unconditionally, but to a level that I learned the definition of what unconditional love even means. Because also before that, I was like, oh, unconditional love is not possible because everyone has um things that, how can you not change your mind if somebody does something really bad, and like, how can that not impact your love for someone? And so I didn't buy into the idea of like unconditional love, but experiencing this thing inside me that loved me to this level, like this level of unconditionally, yeah, I was like, okay, now I understand. It was like it doesn't matter what you do. And this is, again, I don't want this to sound like I'm saying that you don't have to be responsible for your actions. Like all of those things are still, they all stand and they're all valid. But from the perspective of this thing inside me that I saw love me unconditionally, it was like, oh, I don't care what you do. There's nothing you could do. Like, imagine the worst thing that you could do, I would still love you the same way, the same amount. And it doesn't matter if you, like, I'm not gonna love you more if you do amazing things either. It's just like the love is just constant, and it's just there, and yeah. And so when I got to access that, I was like, oh, okay, the work is not to go and acquire self-love from the outside. It's like it's more like this finding a way to connect. And it could be acquiring some skills to connect with it. Um, but yeah, it's the work is to connect with it and to kind of I wrote a blog post about this, and in that I wrote you can think of it as like having this gem inside that is covered in dust or it has some dust on it, and the work is to like find the gem and dust off the dust. And by dust, I mean the conditioning and the beliefs that I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy of love or I'm not valuable or I'm not, all the other core beliefs that people can have.
Such a beautiful metaphor. Um, how did you develop your framework for self-love and the pyramid that you have in your post?
Um, I'm trying to remember the exact moment that it came up, but I think it was um I think I was in conversation with people who were like asking me about self-love and being like, "Oh, how do I learn to love myself or how do I learn to love myself more?" And and in doing that in I sat down and I thought about my journey and what worked, and it was like, oh, I tried like 50 different things, but actually there was like 4 or 5 things that really moved the needle, or that those 5 things um I can't remember if I said 50 things, how many things did I say? I forgot the numbers that I used, but let's say I tried like 10 different things. And it's like what I realized is that, oh, okay, 3 of them are related to the nervous system. Another 3 are related to emotions, and like for example, the AOA course, RAIN, and IFS. I would say all these 3 fall into the emotional fluidity piece. Meditation, for example, might fall into nervous system or maybe emotional fluidity as well. And so I was like, okay, if we actually forget about the tools, what are the fundamental shifts that are happening in the body? Um, and I realized, okay, it's like the nervous system, emotional stuff, like emotional fluidity, feeling your emotions, working through the backlog, and connection. So that first I just came up with those 3. And it's funny, I had 4 at first. So I had those 3 plus like one at the top that was like question mark. And that one, I had this hunch that it was like something like to do with connection to the universe or something. But I had no firsthand experience from the thing that I intuitively had a sense for, but didn't have like hard evidence for or hard personal experience for. So I decided to omit that. And then, so yeah, I came up with those 3. And then later on, I remembered the inner critic stuff. Like I remembered how important that had been at the like closer to the beginning of my journey, and because I also started to see that being a barrier for like some friends and clients. So I added that back in, or I added that in. So yeah, it became like nervous system, emotional fluidity, connection, and then the kind of transforming your inner critic is kind of runs through all the layers. They're all kind of interdependent and kind of they feed into each other and off of each other. So
What was your own sense of this portion of, this question mark or connecting to the universe or something like that? Like, what was the intuition there in your own experience?
um so I had this like vague sense that this thing that I had tapped into in my being, that I kind of could feel it at the bottom of my stomach, kind of around not stomach, belly, the bottom of my belly. Yeah, and this thing that I had accessed felt like it wasn't just in my body. So yeah, it's kind of like it's a vague sense and vague intuition, so it's like hard to verbalize, but it felt like it wasn't confined to my body. Kind of like awareness, how you can't like find the the boundaries of. You can't be like, oh, it ends here or it starts here. It felt like that. It felt like this thing was just like this spacious thing that I couldn't find the boundaries of, and it went beyond my body. And so that's why I had a sense that there was more to this than meets the eye.
Beautiful, beautiful. Can you tell me what your coaching practice looks like and how you work with people?
Yeah. Let's see, where's the best place to start? So the sessions are basically informed by the framework. But ultimately the thing that is um yeah, the kind of thing that I want them to come away with, if there is something, for the most part, I just try to kind of be with them and meet them where they're at. Uh, but if there is a trajectory or a direction that we're heading to, it's getting to more getting to a relationship with their emotions so that everything within them is accepted. Everything in them is loved, because I'm quite convinced by this point that every single part, even the parts that do let's say harmful things, are doing it still from a place of love. It's just that they're misinformed because their model of the world is limited, and the information that they've received is limited. So in that limited reality, they've concluded that this is the best way to survive, or this is the best way to get the needs met. But it's coming from a place of, I want this person to survive and to be loved and to flourish. So once the part gets to see more of reality, then it softens and realizes, oh, okay, I don't need to do this anymore. And then there's love there. So yeah, I kind of, with the coaching, I kind of want them to come away with that over time, of just like being, if a negative emotion comes up, just being able to be comfortable with that or be okay with that. Um and if it's not uncomfortable, okay, again, like being with the discomfort, being with the, yeah, a part of me really hates this, a part of me really wants this to go away, and just acknowledging everything, loving everything ultimately. And yeah, so we do like nervous system stuff. So I try to, yeah, we do some nervous system exercises to try and get them into the body and kind of stop the mind racing as much. And then get into a mix of parts work and feeling through emotions with that kind of goal in mind. Um, yeah, so the self-love piece is not necessarily targeted at like directly, but it's more like, oh, if we get to do all of these things, then the self-love will just come out by itself. And also do more of the dynamic emotional stuff that I mentioned earlier as well. So like if somebody's feeling very restless or frustrated, I'll get them to do, release that, do movements, stomp their feet, dance, whatever. It's kind of just being responsive to whatever's here, whatever wants to be seen, whatever wants to be attended to. Um, yeah, so that's kind of my approach with it.
Hmm. What advice would you give someone who's watching this and is curious about developing self-love for themselves? Like, what advice would you give them?
I think I mentioned pain before. Like pain can be a very motivating tool. And desire as well. Desire can be like, if you have a longing for something, if you really desire in a deep way, not in a hedonistic way, but just in a kind of, yeah, like something in me really wants this, or really desires, really longs for this. Or and then the other side is like, oh, I am pained by these things, like how I was like having so much self-doubt, like. And I think getting really in touch with those two things is really powerful for then having these natural motivations come up. So like if you really get in touch with the pain of something, and you really get in touch with the desire for something, it becomes clear what you have to do next. So I would say if somebody wants to develop more self-love, or find this thing in them that loves them, or get in touch with more feelings of compassion for themselves, um, I would, yeah, I would encourage them to get in touch with why they have that goal. And yeah, the way I would recommend is by getting in touch with, okay, what are the things in your life right now that are painful, and what are the things that you feel like you don't have but want, and just get in touch with those. And then that, I think, should really make it clear what needs to be done. Um, and I think with regards to like self-love specifically, I think it doesn't really matter like what tools you use. Um, like just the intention of it, that just the desire to want self-love, I think things will just kind of unravel over time. And the purpose of the framework is kind of to see that if you have like a bunch of tools in front of you and you don't know what, there's almost like this element of like decision paralysis, where you're like, I don't know what, I've heard so much advice and so many things and so many tools, I don't know what to do next. Um, the framework is there to be like, okay, like, there's tools that target the nervous system. There's tools that will help for emotional fluidity. There's like connection. There's the negative inner voice. And it's like, okay, which one do you feel like you're most wanting to focus on next? And then find the tools that do that thing, like nervous system or whatever. Yeah.
I'm curious to ask your opinion about something related to the inner critic. Uh, you mentioned both Joe Hudson and Robert Bea talking about how that can be, the inner critic can be sort of a negative, internalized, angry voice, maybe someone else or yourself in any case. I guess I was just really curious reading that because that made a lot of sense to me. And I'm not 100% sure, but it seemed like that didn't match my own experience of the inner critic dissolving. Like I had a really strong inner critic earlier in my life, and at some point that just like dissolved through different practices that I was doing. And I feel like I haven't done any anger work or like that much anger work. And I don't remember that being a part of that dissolving it. And I feel like I still have things to do with anger and more to explore there, but I don't have too much inner critic stuff happening. And I'm curious what you think of that and what could be happening there.
Yeah. Um, I wonder if it's that maybe at some point with the other stuff that you did, whether it was meditation or other tools, that maybe there was a part of you that was driving the or was kind of behind that voice, that got its belief dislodged, and in doing that it kind of subsided. So that would be kind of the first thing that comes to mind, kind of as a guess. So I think there's just many different avenues. I think ultimately it's the thing that is causing those words to come out, like, oh, you're so whatever, like, why'd you do that? All of this is coming from this voice is convinced that there is something bad about you. That's why it's criticizing you, right? And I think if it realizes that, oh, okay, I'm not all that bad, it usually softens. But I mean, that can also come out in certain triggers where, like, for the most part, the negative inner voice is not there, but then something triggers, and then it's like, oh my God, this thing is back. And to me, that seems like some belief is still there. And then the other thing I would say is that I think I mentioned this in my essay as well, that usually the negative inner voice sounds like someone you know. So it's like a parent or a partner, ex or something. And yeah, that also, like, working with separating yourself from that person's the internalized beliefs of that person's kind of model of reality is also another way, I think, to kind of soften the inner critic.
Hmm.
Because it's essentially saying, like, it's like that person is like, let's say it's like your parent, and they would be like, oh, why are you so loud, for example? I'm just coming up with a basic example. And you realize that, oh, if I tell myself, why are you so loud? And not become loud, then that means that I can avoid my parents shouting at me. So it's like a preemptive thing, that is like a defensive thing. Um, so yeah, like, working to dismantle that belief kind of makes it soften and go down quite a bit.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, to my memory, I don't really remember when it happened specifically, but I feel like that part of me just kind of noticed that criticizing myself didn't really help at all. I was like, and yeah, I think it happened gradually over time though, and I don't remember a specific thing that caused it. But I was just so curious because the way you described it was connected to anger, and I feel like I still have work to do there, and I don't remember anger work being a part of what that was. So I was just very curious what you thought about that. Um, I wonder, I've been really inspired by something that you've talked about a few times on Twitter of, I'll quote you now. You say, in the last year or so, my brain has become surprisingly good at seeing the upside, the silver lining of anything bad I experience. Happens without conscious effort. And when it does, I start taking action on focusing on the silver lining, which increases the odds of that outcome. I'm just curious about that practice of finding the silver lining and how you started doing that and what practicing that has been like for you.
Yeah, for the most part, I think I just started noticing it happening with a lot of these things. It's like hard to find the kind of point of origin, but um, I think being being comfortable with emotions and being able to, like, be with emotions, feel through emotions, and also meditation, like, these things probably helped a lot, because it was like, I think before, when something bad would happen, part of the suffering was the emotions that I had to face. And because I didn't feel fully resourced to work with them, I felt disempowered. So when something bad would happen, it was like that thing plus the consequence of being disempowered to actually, like, deal with the emotions. Because also historically I would feel emotions quite intensely, so I was like, oh, this is this is bad news if this bad thing has happened. Um, but yeah, now I find myself, like, the thing happens, and then I'm like, oh shit, like, I kind of have some, instinctive emotions in response to it, and then and then just within just a few minutes of kind of acknowledging and being with those emotions, I think, oh well, now that this has happened, well maybe this will mean that some this good thing, like I'll like just my brain will come up with a yeah, basically silver lining. Um and then and then I will get like happy by the idea of that silver lining. Um, and then I'll start being like, okay, well, let's like kind of work towards that. And but I think, yeah, for the most part, it's because it's less overwhelming having to deal with the negative consequences and the emotional responses that come up.
Can you tell me a story that you remember of a time that you found the silver lining in something?
Let's see. It just happens like all the time. I'm trying to remember like yeah, I can't remember exactly. This is literally just happening all the time that I can't remember specific. Maybe if we talk about something else, my brain will come up
Mm.
with a recent one.
Mhm. Would you have, how to put it? Yeah, say someone was interested in this practice of finding the silver lining, like how would you recommend that they practice this or take up this habit?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. Probably like working with or identifying what's the worst part of bad things happening. Like, what is the most painful part? Is it that you like maybe lose your feeling of independence or feeling of freedom, or maybe it's that yeah, you like the way it was for me, like, oh, you feel disempowered by the intensity of those emotions, or like um yeah, it's kind of like what is the common consequence of bad things happening, regardless of what the bad thing is? Is it that you don't like your model of reality changing? Like maybe you had some expectations and now you have to face the new reality. Like, is it that? Is it control? Is it what is that thing that makes bad things worse than they are on their own? Um, and then yeah, and then working on that to kind of resolve the associated fear, associated like overwhelm or whatever it might be. Yeah, and then maybe the other one is like I don't know if this is directly helpful, but when I did the AOA course, one of the things that they gave us was doing gratitude every day. And so doing that kind of exercise is not something I necessarily do all the time, but I'll go through phases of my life where I'll do it every day for a few weeks, or I'll like do um yeah, do it at certain points when I remember. And I think doing the gratitude is like your brain gets trained in finding the good in things. So like you have your day and you're reflecting on your day, and you have to come up with 10 original things that you're grateful for. And you can't say the same stuff every day. You know, there's only so many times you can be like, oh, I'm grateful for my that I have a roof over my head, like as much as that is a privilege and is, but you kind of want to come up with some new stuff. So then you start to really see the good in things. So that's another one. And then the last one I would say is another thing that helps, I think, is noticing moments of pleasure in your day. So it's kind of related to the gratitude thing, but it's more about the felt sense of it. So um, I think this is something that meditation has been helping me with, and metta practice. I'm sure you will have more to say on this, but kind of doing that kind of practice has meant that I notice just like, oh, there's like a pleasurable moment here. Okay. Just like noticing it and then moving on with your day, and or oh, I like the way my foot feels right now, like things like that. So I think all of it is like your brain becomes more focused on seeing good things, or seeing beauty, or seeing pleasure, seeing whatever. And then when something bad happens, then I think it's more likely to then scan for, okay, what could be good here?
Hmm. I love hearing that. Like, it wouldn't have been obvious to me that that practice would be connected to gratitude or to taking pleasure in the things that are already present. But that makes a lot of sense that that would sort of almost prepare the mind and the heart for noticing that there could be pleasure or joy or fulfillment or meaning in something that's difficult. And yeah, I love hearing that. Um,
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because I also was remembering that in real time. So
hmm. um, I'm curious if there's any ways that you're excited to learn more about self-love or other areas of it that you want to learn more about, or that are still like open questions for you, or what you think the future of your exploration of self-love might hold.
mhm. Yeah, a few different things. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like I've been getting into meditation a lot recently, or this year. So I really want to, the piece that we talked about earlier about this thing that I discovered inside me that allowed me didn't have any like boundaries. I'm really keen to explore that further and see, just kind of experience it in higher resolution and see it from more angles almost. Um, yeah, and see kind of what's there, what's yeah. Just I'm just really curious about all of that stuff. So that's one area. The other thing is I'm interested in the question of um how does someone else come, like they have a goal and how can they get there in a much quicker time? How can they find this inner resource in them in less time? Um, Especially in my coaching, that's something that I'm um, kind of interested in. Um, then the other thing that I'm really fascinated by in relation to this is the piece around emotions, and because I think that emotions is just like a big thing in all of this. And yeah, I'm kind of curious about, the stuff I was talking about, like for example, realizing that, oh, if you have a complete experience of some emotion, you actually get to experience pleasure, or at least less discomfort. Um, yeah, and I'm really interested in finding more and more resolution, more and more detail in how emotions work and how they shift, and and as like Robert Bale would say, how they get fabricated, how they get, both sides of it. It's like, how do we like fully acknowledge and fully be with something as it's emerging, and then at the same time also not fully buying into the story of it. And um yeah, I'm just really interested about how all of this works. How resistance works, for example, noticing that one thing I noticed was like, I was like, oh, how come sometimes like I'm resisting some emotions and sometimes I'm not? Like I really started paying attention, and I noticed that if I identify the sensation, so let's say I'm feeling fear in my stomach, if I identify and kind of find the boundaries of this fear, what I notice is when I'm resisting it, there's these muscles around it that are tensing. I don't know exactly like what's happening in the body. This is kind of like the mind's description of it, I guess. But it feels like the muscles around this emotion are tensing. So I noticed, oh, if I soften these muscles, if I relax these muscles, then the resistance kind of goes away. Um, yeah, just like a bunch of things like this. I'm really fascinated in finding, more mental moves around working with difficult emotions, more ways to, yeah, have them be less uncomfortable, especially in my work as well, like in guiding people when they're working through difficult emotions. What else? And then the other piece about self-love is the balance between self-reliance and reliance on other people, or like interdependence. Yeah, I think, yeah, like I said, the self-love can be seen as a way to be like, oh, I'm just gonna do it all myself, I'll be my own everything. But yeah, I want to kind of see, okay, what are the ways to use connection in a way that feels reciprocal and deepening for both people, and in a way that doesn't um yeah, doesn't feel transactional, doesn't feel, it's kind of, and I think the way our society is set up, that's like that. I feel like that shouldn't be a question, but because of the way our society is set up, is, yeah, it does become a question. Yeah.
Thanks for answering all that. I will be curious to see how that unfolds for you and what you continue to learn about these topics. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to ask you about is I remembered that you did this experiment on Twitter like a year and a half ago or something, where you said, let's try an experiment. Reply, and I will share my read on you. Could be your gifts, strengths, wounds, vibe, etc. And I would be curious to hear about what that was like for you and what prompted that and what you learned or anything that you felt like sharing about that.
Yeah, that was like one of the most fun projects I've done. It was like so cool and fun, and I didn't know what to expect. I just kind of did it like on a whim. Um, yeah, I think that shift that I mentioned before, when something shifted where I started to feel more resourced, um, it's like when that shift happened, I could begin to see people. I think before it was just so like cloudy and so hazy, and um yeah, I think I was showing up differently in connections. And then when the switch took place, it was like getting a new pair of glasses or something. It was like, oh, okay, I can see. And so because of that new way of seeing, I wanted to play around, and also because I'd seen um I had an experience where I could kind of feel these things, like being in an altered state of consciousness. I could kind of um tune into something in someone and like suddenly feel some things that are not normally like obvious. Um and I was convinced that all of those stuff is there, like in any state, like in a sober state or any kind of normal state. So that, I guess, doing that challenge or that project was that experiment, basically being like, oh, can these things be seen in a very normal, ordinary state of mind? And yeah, that's how it came about, and it was really fun, and it was unusually vulnerable for me, because it wasn't like, oh, comment and I will give you a compliment, or I will give you like, sometimes like something would come up where I'll be like, well, should I say it or should I not? Because like it's so it feels so personal. And sometimes like occasionally if it was particularly personal, I would DM them instead. Um but yeah, it was quite vulnerable to share stuff like that, and also for them to, or for to kind of open up the possibility of them disliking me as a result of me saying that thing that might upset them. Um and but yeah, it was quite well received, I would say. People had fun, and um yeah, I'm happy with how it turned out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Would you say you learned anything from doing that?
For sure, yeah. I think I learned a few things. I think one is I learned like the importance of recognizing your projections, like noticing what is just you're reading someone's vibe and what is you just projecting stuff onto people. And I think there's always an element of that. I don't think we can step fully out of that, or I haven't found a way to like fully step out of that and like not have any projections. Um, but I had to be mindful of that, of like I would come up, and the way it would come up, it was like kind of poetry. You know how poetry just kind of descends on you out of nowhere. That's how this was. So, and that's why like somebody sometimes would come in and I wouldn't be able to respond in that moment. I would just kind of have them in mind, and then like maybe a few hours later it would just suddenly descend on me and I would just like quickly type, and then I would read it and I'll be like, okay, how much of this is the vibe and this thing that is descending on me, and how much of it is like my projection and that thing going through my system and coming out um through my like biases and stuff. Um yeah, and I had to, yeah, be careful of that and maybe omit some stuff if it did feel that way. The other thing is like I also realized that, when people say like you can see someone through, you can see yourself through someone, like that was another realization, like, oh, okay, so if I'm noticing this thing in them, there's something in me that also has that attribute as well. Um, yeah.
That was like more than a year ago, and I wonder if there's any ways that using that skill of reading people or noticing qualities about them or seeing them has played a part in your life since then.
Um, I haven't really like actively tried or thought about it, or like thought about actively using it. I did after like a few months after that post, I did do another one where it was like, oh, I'm gonna do that thing, but do it more like I'm gonna write you a poem based
Hmm.
on, again, what's like descending on me. Um, and that was fun as well, but it felt like maybe I also like slightly lost access to that. So I don't know if it's like always there or if it's like you practice it and it becomes more readily available. But in my practice, I think sometimes yeah, I try to kind of be be with them. And that thing that I noticed that was like, oh, is it my projections? It's like that is the thing, that is one thing that I try to remember, of like, oh, make sure that I'm not operating from a part in the session, or make sure I'm not like projecting something or making assumptions and stuff. So in that way, like being in those kind of scenarios where I have to be really careful of what I'm projecting and what is kind of um yeah, how I'm orienting towards someone. Um yeah, that's one way where it shows up these days.
What are sort of the tells that help you know that you're projecting something about yourself onto this other person versus like really seeing something about them?
Hmm. So usually I think that if it has a hint of negativity to it, if it's like criticism, so this is including a thought that I'm having, not necessarily something I'm saying to someone, but yeah, usually if there's like a negative element or flavor to it, it's usually like one thing I've started doing is like if I say, oh, I'm noticing that this person, let's say it might be like, oh, I noticed that this person is looking down on me, let's say, right? I will like turn it around and I'll be like, am I looking down on them or am I putting them on a pedestal? And then that just doing that quick like mirroring thing, it like takes me out of it. I just like I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I that's me project like it was me that was doing it. Or
Mm,
like maybe they're doing it too, I don't know, but it's like the fact that I'm noticing something probably means like and the fact that I'm annoyed by it particularly, or the fact that something, it has a negative feeling to it, there's something in me as well that is getting activated. So like investigating that. Um, yeah, that's probably the most obvious example that comes to mind.
mm. Well, I really appreciate you humoring my curiosity about so many different
Hmm.
aspects of your story and self-love and other parts of your life. And I wonder, is there anything that you'd like to talk more about or ask questions about or have a conversation about?
Hmm. Well, I am curious about the discussion we had about seeing the silver lining in things. I'm curious what meta practice has had or what effect meta practice has had on your life and like changes that you've seen as a result.
Hmm. Um, it's interesting. I feel like one of the things I've really come to believe from doing a lot of that practice is that there's always more love available, that we can always feel more love perceptually, and we can always express more love through our actions. And in a way, that's been really humbling for me to notice. Like, I have all of these heroes that really inspire me, like Peace Pilgrim or the Buddha or my teacher, or I don't know, I really like Marvin Gaye or some other people come to mind, that different people that I'm like, wow, these people are so loving or so wise or whatever. And um, I feel like when I compare myself to them, I'm like, oh, I'm not very loving or very wise or whatever. And because there's so much more to go. And um, it's like, well, that could be something that I use to beat myself up and compare myself and be like, oh, I'm not good enough. I should be more loving or more wise or whatever it is. And there's a lot of qualities that I admire in different people. And conversely, it's like, I think I've come to see more and more with this practice that there's always more love available. And that gets kind of exciting for me, where it's like, oh, I could feel more love. And that's part of why I wanted to talk to you, because I was like, oh, I feel like um, um, I have this talking point about like, don't skip leg day, loving yourself, don't skip arm day, loving others. And then recently I added, don't skip cardio, which is loving all beings. And I feel like I've done a lot more work on loving other people, and that's always been more intuitive to me. And like loving myself has been much harder, and I've sort of skipped leg day, as it were. And so talking to you is an opportunity to really learn more about how to do that and focus on that. And I love the blog posts you've written and the work that you've put out. And I loved doing a session with you earlier this year. It was really very profound, and was just really happy to be like, yeah, everybody should go with work with Anita. This is great. And yeah, so I look back on when I started doing this practice in Sirius, and yeah, I just see myself having become more loving, where it's easier for me to feel love for myself and others and also for all beings. And then that manifests more and more through my actions, through acts of kindness. And I see myself being really loving to other people and doing a lot of things that are just very kind and doing every kind action that I can to help people or to love them and learning more and more different ways of expressing that kindness or that love. And I get excited when I'm like, oh, there's another way I could express love and kindness. Like I find new ones all the time. And, I don't choose to do all of the ones that I know. There are ones that I see people expressing love where it just doesn't really feel like something I'm excited about or feels like the one that I want to. But just knowing that it's out there is really good, and expressing love in the way that feels good and that I'm excited about is always really joyful. And yeah, so I think that's the big trend, is just being more loving towards myself and others, and that knowing that that can continue to deepen. Like there's no limit to how much love is possible to both experience internally and to express through our actions. And I look forward to that kind of continuing, because I imagine, I'm like 32 now, and I hope that as the years go on and I do this practice more and more, I'll be more and more loving, both for other people, and also that's very correlated with my own happiness and joy. And I see no reason that that wouldn't just keep going indefinitely. Yeah.
Can't imagine anything more fun to be nerding about than love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say as well, like the stuff you're talking about, I think uh you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk as well. Like with my posts and stuff, you were so encouraging and so loving. Like um, when I was like struggling to find a way to communicate it well, you were really pushing me to kind of not give up on it. Um, so yeah, it's nice to see that your love for love is something that is so like we can benefit from it, it's so beautiful. Yeah. I had another question as well, which I don't know if this will like open up too many kind of like ambiguous doors or whatever. But I'm curious if you have any kind of hunches or maybe personal experience with the thing that I was talking about this like um I don't know what to call it. This I just call it thing, which is not a good word for it, but um it does definitely isn't a part, so that's why I don't call it a part, but this thing that is just loving, is able to love the the self so unconditionally. I wonder if you have any um hunches about what this is, or what the kind of the relationship or the connection between this love and what's out there, like the universe itself, and what that connection is.
Hmm. Yeah, this is something I've been so curious about really my whole life. I remember even as a kid just being like, what is the universe, and like, why are we here? And in particular, I wanted to know how to live and what being a good person was. And that seemed so intimately connected to like what the universe was and what it meant to be alive. And I feel like I'm still asking that question and will be for my whole life. And, I believe in reincarnation, so I imagine for multiple lives. But, the thing that comes to mind is just uh, how to put it. Yeah, sometimes I find theistic languages or metaphors or traditions really inspiring. And for me, that's, for some people, that's sort of triggering or, associated with social practices they don't approve of or whatever. But I think that that's a really interesting metaphor for spiritual practice and its unfolding. And um, um, a really big part of my life is almost the assumption that everyone is here to do something. It's like an axiom mathematically. It's like, what if you just assume everyone is here to do something? Like, how do you interact with them? And, how can I help them? How can I be of support to them? And I think part of that more and more as I really look at that again and again, I try to look in every interaction, just like, what is this person here to do? How can I help them? Um, it really seems almost like, I mean, you used this metaphor earlier of a gem that had dust on it and you're just uncovering it. And it's like, well, a gem has lots of different facets. And it seems to me like each person is a facet of this larger thing. And they're like perfect in themselves, but they're also connected to everyone else. And like, yeah, I don't know. It seems to me as I hear you talk about it, it's like, wow, the, the like interpretation I have hearing is like that you saw God in yourself and like that you are God in a certain way. And I think everyone has that in them. And, some people could call it like Buddha nature or, different phrases for that. Different religions and practices and spiritual traditions have different ways of talking about this, but there's a reason that they all are like pointing to this. And I don't know, God is just fine with me. And it's like, yeah, there's this aspect of who we are that is beyond our specific circumstances or personality or who we are. And I don't know, I think it's beautiful that you've connected to something like that and seen that in yourself and see that in other people. And to the extent that I've had glimpses of something like that, it's one of the most meaningful, relieving, profound things. And I think part of our work here being alive is just to connect to that more and more and learn what that is.
Yeah, that's really well put. Yeah. And I think the thing you said about each person having a different gem or kind of being part of the same, maybe it's the part of the same mountain, and then there's like different gems that each person has inside them. That kind of ties into the vow thing as well that you've been talking about. I feel like that is kind of like each person is here to do something, which I think in the past I've always been hesitant to. It's like that Visa's meme thing about like life is, there's two ends of the spectrum. There's one end which is like life is meaningless, and the other one is like life is really meaningful. I can't remember the exact and you kind of have to strike the balance. I think I used to err on the side of like, oh, life is meaningless, so
Mm,
like you and in that, I think from that perspective, thinking that, oh, everyone has a purpose, it's like a direct opposition to that idea. But I think as I've been the boat, it's like, I don't know, it's just like audio, I guess people can't see, but as the boat is kind of going in the middle between those two ends of the spectrum, I think whether it's true or not, I think doesn't really matter. I think it's the idea of like deciding to take on that belief that, oh, everybody has a vow or a purpose or something that they're here to do, um and by doing that you get to actually do more meaningful work or enjoy your work more. um yeah, I think I've been connecting with that a bit more over time, and yeah, I think it's a really, yeah, nourishing way to look at it, a nourishing perspective to take on for sure.
hmm hmm I'm curious about like, um, a lot of your work is focused on self-love, and that's what we've been talking about. And of course, a lot of my work has been with love and metta practice and the Brahma Viharas and a lot of that, not exclusively, but it has to do with loving other people and loving all beings. And of course, it does include love for self as well. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how those are related to each other, like loving yourself and loving other people, or even loving all
Mm.
beings.
Yeah, I think the way I see it is like, uh I think it's different for everyone, but the way it was, I'll just say the way it was for me. So I'm just talking from personal experience. It was like, yeah, the more resource I became, the more I could be with more of each person's like totality. Um, because I saw I saw less of them as a threat and more of them as um, as a connection that is kind of mutually nourishing and mutually beneficial. Um, and yeah, being able to kind of change that or have that shift really made me like be able to connect with people deeper. I think maybe like you, but the opposite. So like, how you said that you were like doing arm day, I think, but we're skipping leg day sometimes. Maybe I've kind of been the other way around in that because I've been someone who has uh I just have tendencies to want to be independent and to be self-reliant. Um, yeah, I think for me, yeah, self-love has been a really good way to feel more love and to be okay with myself and to be okay with the parts of myself that it's like the parts of myself I didn't like in myself, I also didn't like in other people. And the more I got to like those parts, the more I was okay with other people's equivalent parts. So yeah, I think now that's one of the things that I'm shifting my focus to as well is like um doing more of the arm day kind of thing, loving others. And actually surprisingly, like the coaching has been quite helpful for that because with the coaching I have to be in a place or I get to be in a place that um in IFS term they call it like self energy. It's like this compassionate place where you just kind of accept someone in their totality. And maybe actually like maybe in not every moment, like if you interacted with them outside of a session, maybe if you're not in self all the time, then there's parts of you that are bounce or parts of them that are bouncing off against your parts. But in a kind of session scenario where, I try to be in self for as much as I can, I get to just be with like the person like fully to the extent that I can. And that feels so loving and that feels so compassionate and that feels like they just bring, anything to the table and I'm just like, yeah, that's totally fine, That's maybe it's something that for them is shameful or for them is difficult or they can't like maybe accept it in themselves yet or something. And it's like it's um it's so easy to love in that kind of space, in that kind of setting. So I've been trying to bring that outside as well, like almost like learning the skill in session and then taking that outside so that and this thing that I mentioned before as well, like turning things around and be like, oh, if I'm noticing something in someone, oh, it's like, am I doing the same thing or am I not accepting that thing in myself? And then once I realize that, then it's easier to love them because I'm like, oh, okay, it's not, I don't need to kind of make them into the bad guy. Like, um, we're in this together kind of thing. It sounds cheesy, but
Hmm.
um, yeah. So, but I would, I think, yeah, I would like to do more of the arm day stuff and go deeper and deeper into that.
Hmm. Do you think they're really mutually supportive, like loving ourselves and loving other people, and probably the order that is easiest? It might be different for different people, but um, at least from both my experience and like talking to people about it, it seems to me like you hit a certain stage where somehow you notice that people, whoever they are, whether it's yourself or someone else in particular, or even an animal or another kind of being, is intrinsically worthy of love, where you notice that, oh, just because they're alive, they're worthy of love. And um, I feel like when you notice that, it motivates you to want to learn to love everyone. And if there's people that are still difficult for you to love, or that you have judgments of, or hard feelings towards, or someone who really hurt you, or something like that, like if you can kind of juxtapose whatever's difficult to love about them or yourself even with that observation of like, oh, just because they're alive, they're worthy of love. And it's possible to have this unconditional love even for this person, whether it's yourself or someone who hurt you or someone you just find annoying or whatever. That's part of what that power of them being mutually supportive is like noticing that people are intrinsically worthy of love just because they're alive, or however it is that you notice or conceive of that, and then starting to apply it to the people that are difficult for you to love, whether it's yourself or someone who hurt you or someone you judge or whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's really well put. Like the the ability to uh not blame, I guess, is kind of the main kind of thing. Is like if you can see someone and you can assume that they're worthy of love, then you don't have to like blame them the same way that it's when you don't think that they're worthy of love that you can really like blame and really see that, or really kind of have this view of they're wrong or they're bad. But if you kind of take on the belief, I think for me it was weirdly enough, it was like with free will, like being like, okay, I'm just gonna adopt the idea that there's no free will, and with that, I get to just see that whenever somebody does anything, they, if the circumstances were to be different, or the set of events that led them to do the thing, if those things were different, then they would have done things differently, right? So yeah, that kind of was one of the ways that I was really able to have compassion for people, is just being like, okay, they did what they did because of the circumstances.
Hmm. Love that. I find myself curious. I'm remembering that earlier in the conversation, you said that at a certain point you felt uh, like you had enough, that you were resourced enough to start focusing on other people. And, maybe that was when you started your coaching practice and you talked about service and how you were like wanted to be of service to other people. And I wonder if you could tell me more about your relationship to service and what service means to you.
Yeah, this this is a multifaceted question, I would say, or answer. Um, yeah, I think I always had this desire to be of value, or to be helpful, to be useful, I guess. Um, yeah, and I had that, and then next to that, I also had some difficulties around um it was like if I wanted to help someone, sometimes I wouldn't know if it was the right thing to do or not. Um, because of, for whatever reason, like things in my childhood or whatever led me to get to a place where, um, yeah, there was like feelings of being conflicted sometimes around, yeah, around wanting to help but thinking I shouldn't, and then on the other hand, not wanting to help and then thinking that I should, or it's expected of me, and so I had kind of a complicated relationship with being of service and being helpful and helping other people. And so I was like, okay, I'm only gonna be helpful when it feels right. I'm never gonna do it out of obligation unless I really, really have to. Um, that was fine, but obviously there was also a part of me that wanting to wanted to be helpful, just kind of I don't know, I wanted to just be of service without the mental gymnastics. Um and And yeah, I think that was like a big question for me around that time. And then when that switch happened, it was like I found ways to be of service in a way that felt good for me, because what I realized was that sometimes you have the intention of helping someone, but you don't have capacity. It's like, let's say if you're not a confident driver and you offer to drive, but then you're like worried about crashing the car. It's like that's not it's not helping in the grand scheme of things. Like that's just it's like I realized that it's about finding what feels right for me to be helpful in, and doing that. And then when I did that, it felt like it's like the obvious thing to do. It no longer became about even helping. It was like, oh, that's just the next obvious action. Um, and then a lot of that stuff I had around being of service and helping, all these things just kind of melted away. There is still some stuff around, um, yeah, wanting to be of value, and what happens when you're not as valuable as you wanted to be, or you didn't manage to like help someone the way you wanted to, etc. All this, I mean, I think that's normal to have um hang-ups around stuff like that. But for the most part, I think that switch happened when I realized that, yeah, I just need to tap into what feels natural for me, and then the other things can just kind of happen naturally.
Hmm, beautiful. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk more about?
Um, no, I think I really enjoyed the conversation. I thought that the questions were really thoughtful, and yeah, there was a lot of room to just kind of uh, go as deep or as wide as I wanted. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the spaciousness and all of the openness around your questions and the way you ask them. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, it's been a privilege to learn more about your life and to learn more about self-love. And I know I'll be applying some of the things I learned from this, and I hope it helps other people too. So thanks for everything you're doing and for sharing it with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.